All right, guys, yet again, you are watching live footage of protesters inside Trump Tower in New York City. The protesters, identified as the Jewish Voice for Peace protesters, obviously they are wearing red short shirts and are being escorted out one by local authorities. They have actually been placed in handcuffs as they have now illegally entered Trump Tower. Joining us now to discuss this and so much more via audio is Mr. Brian Boyd, a 30-year professional intelligence analyst right here on the Live Zone. Mr. Boyd, thank you so much for joining us on the show.
My pleasure. I'll do the best I can to help you.
So obviously this is a fluid situation, something that's taking place as I speak. We see hundreds of protesters now making their way inside Trump Tower. Obviously, at this point, I would assume this is what's being deemed as trespassing. Individually, they are now being escorted, handcuffed one by one. From an intelligence standpoint, isn't this something that perhaps we should have been made aware of and or expected?
Certainly. But in past events like this, they've always ignored it. That's what happened on the university campuses. They started by not doing something about it immediately, and then it got out of hand. So what you're seeing is the sureness and the swiftness of justice, which is the number one thing when it comes to trying to stopping a criminal event. You don't want to give them a platform, and you certainly don't want them to continue to cause problems. So it's more than a trespassing thing. It's designed to be a political event. And you have to understand, most of these people probably are not students.
We're actually seeing that as well. Yet again, they are decked out, they being the protesters in red shirts, handcuffed one by one. I would assume that this started probably outside of the Trump Tower, not too far from there. We know that there also happened to be a protest taking place as well as they made their way down the street to the tower. We see that the New York City police are actually involved. At any point, do you think any other authority, if you will be brought into place to handle this?
Well, two things can happen. Because of the changes in the law and because the State Department and because we declare any kind of any kind of a group as a foreign terrorist organization, if they could link these individuals to any organization, the one thing they have as a weapon against these people is, number one, find out who they are, how they get this kind of money. Obviously, somebody provide them a ton of money to have the identical T-shirts. If you watch carefully for the last half hour, like I have, there's one older lady there. She keeps patting the younger kids on the back and encouraging them. So she's part of the organizer. And you have to think, okay, are the young and dumb ones following the older lady? And that's the real question. So you have to find out who the organizers are of this event, find out if they are students, and you could yank their visas, which is what they did with Mahmoud.
And so with that being said, talk about that process. Obviously, those who have been arrested are actually being taken down, I would assume, to the police station, the local police station there. At what point from a federal level do, let's say, an agency or does an agency get involved to make sure that they actually are not doing what you just said, and that is being provided with funding and or actually receiving any type of outside help?
Well, that's the thing that's unique about this relationship with Don Holman as head of ICE. You know, since he has the power to go in these cities and he's able to go in and arrest these dangerous criminals, the key here is to find the agitators, those that are behind the scenes, and to identify them. That's why it's so important to get facial recognition on these people, find out who their connections are, and do a background on each one of them. And many of these people, if they are here on a student visa or some form, they could yank that visa and deport them. Or they could prosecute them, depending on the situation. Then the next question is, are these actually students from New York? Or were these people bussed in from different places around the United States? Number three, were they paid to be there? Because those are the key issues. And if you look at how young some of them are, you think, well, they're probably dumb, but they really don't understand what they're supporting.
And with that being said, can you talk about the repercussions you just made mention of? Let's say they are students. And obviously, to your point, we can tell that a lot of them happen to be young. What would happen or what will happen now that they have been arrested, and what will then unfold over the next several months as they now face the legal system?
Well, they can be expelled, or they can follow through on some sort of a hearing. The unique thing is with all the events going on about the sanctuary cities, and since Mayor, I'm sorry, I can say the mayor's name. I lost my brain here. mayor of New York, with him being fully behind supporting the federal government, he's going to do everything he can to make this work, because he has to represent the city of New York, and he doesn't want to represent the illegals because they're taking up all the city resources. That's what Doge is discovering. They're spending all this money illegally. Hotels, free room and board, the whole bit. So there's a lot of consequences, and they could go after these people in a more severe manner than in the old days when it would be just trespassing and arresting them and letting them go. The key is to gain intelligence on these individuals and then follow through on getting rid of them, arresting them, prosecuting them, or ejecting them from the country.
Yet again, we are speaking with Mr. Brian Boyd. He is an intelligence expert and commentator joining us right here on the Fox 5 Live Zone. Mr. Boyd, we have seen this in the past, and that is this is somewhat like a domino effect. Typically, when a protest happens in one location, we'll see another take place shortly thereafter. Do you expect that to happen as a result of this happening?
Yeah, and if you think like the enemy, and you think like they think, and they think, okay, remember when they occupied the university campuses, they will push the button so far, and if they see the campus police don't do anything, then they can erect tents. Then they see the administration is afraid of upsetting people. The last administration wasn't keen on going after anybody that was either part of the Muslim community and that sort of thing, but there was no enforcement of the law. You might remember the old days of Rudy Giuliani when the city was very safe. He called it the broken window concept. If you don't grab the guy for breaking a window, it's going to get out of hand. We saw this with the cities, with all the riots in the cities, where the police stood back and let several cities in this nation burn. So the important thing, when the enemy sees this, they'll realize the cops are going to do something about it right away. They're going to arrest them. They're going to be identified. They can't hide behind a mask. With new AI technology, they can find them. And so eventually they're going to be prosecuted and or ejected. So they're losing their privileges.
One would argue,
I'm sorry.
Not to cut you off, sir, but one would argue that the ultimate goal for this protest is to yet again bring attention to their cause. And with that being said, I'm curious. I'm wondering if President Trump will address this at any point. And with regard to doing just that, would it yet again continue to, let's say, light that fire and ignite with their cause and or bring attention to it? Or is this something that should be overlooked and just handled on the local level?
No, it cannot be overlooked. When you have these kind of protests that impact international relationships, they impact the safety and the security of our people. Trump Tower is a public place, and it ruins people's rights to be able to go in and trade and be able, the businesses around it are affected, in a disparaging way. So, like I said, this has to be handled swiftly and surely. One of the basic tenets of criminology is the sureness and the swiftness of punishment. It's not so much the punishment itself, it's the sureness and the swiftness that you will get caught. And so that's important. They didn't do a standoff. They didn't let this thing get out of hand. They immediately moved in and took care of business to where they're shutting it down. So that tells the bad guys in this case they're not going to have much of a cause, because they're fighting for a cause that nobody in this country really supports.
With that being said, we know that at least from what we've seen thus far, it has been somewhat peaceful. And so, yet again, I pose the question, the arrests typically based or solely based on the fact that they have entered the premise of the Trump Tower. Is that why this is happening?
Yes. Remember, it's designed for the cameras. It's designed for the media. It's designed to get as much attention to the cause that they support. The problem is the cause that they're supporting doesn't land on the ears of the various members of Congress, whether they're Democrat or Republican. Nobody really stands by what they're asking for. They want Hamas away from their country. They don't want anybody in this country causing disruption to their kids' education, their schools. They want to be able to live in peace. And Trump is all about causing peace and ending war. So they're on a cause that's not popular with anybody.
With that being said, and yet again playing devil's advocate, we know that the protesters happen to be a part of the Jewish Voice for Peace. I say that because we now know that they're standing in allegiance, if you will, or alignment, I should say, along with Mahmoud Khalil. Yet again, as a result of that, perhaps they were overlooked by authorities, didn't think that perhaps yet again they would protest inside the Trump Tower?
Well, I don't have any intelligence on this particular organization, but once they dive into it, it may say they're a cause to the Jewish group, but it's probably a front name. You got to remember, so many of these groups that come about in these various protests, they use all kinds of names. I'd be really curious about how many of these people are actually Jewish students, how many are actually Jewish people. It doesn't make sense for them to attack their own homeland or their own countrymen or their own religion. So it's basically an attack to try and claim it. There's one lady wearing a shirt, veterans for this group, and nobody that I know, my veterans group. You know, I spent 39 years in the Green Berets before I went in federal law enforcement. So, you know, nobody buys into that rhetoric. They're on a lost cause, and it's a slippery slope. The trick is that what they're seeing, and just like you and I are seeing, is going to affect their next tactic, their next attack. And if they think it's going to harm President Trump or harm the cause or stop anything in the way his programs, it's going to fall on deaf ears. And the police are doing their job very effectively, very calmly, and getting the job done, which is important.
Yet again, folks, if you're just joining us, you're watching the Fox 5 Live Zone. This particular picture you see on the top left-hand side happens to be, or video, I should say, a number of officials, authority, if you will, police officers, actually addressing the protesters that have, in essence, illegally entered Trump Tower in New York City. The name of the protesters, Jewish Voice for Peace. At issue, Mr. Khalil, stating that he has, in essence, been treated unfairly, unjustly, and they have been protesting for the last 5 minutes, at least on our screen or so, with regard to them being taken away as well. On the line with us via audio is Mr. Brian Boyd. He is an intelligence expert, commentator, and as you heard him make mention, a former Green Beret. Mr. Boyd, as we get ready to wrap up, I just want to find out from your perspective, what will happen now? And I know you stated that obviously they're going to be taken away, they're going to be processed at some point, and an investigation will get underway as to who they are aligned with. But the question remains, is this something that we should expect to see? Is this something that we should see? And is this something that the authorities will get a handle on immediately so this will not repeat itself?
That's the important thing. As I use the analogy from criminology that the broken window, if you ignore a broken window in a neighborhood, it only escalates later. And a small percentage of the people commit the majority of the crimes. So you have to go after the basic tenet. So when you have these kind of protests, which are typically not peaceful and they're anti-Semitic, and they go against the national security interest of our country, then these people are at peril as individuals. They can all be individually pointed out. They can be isolated, pulled away from their group, find out who they are and what we know about them, book them, give them a criminal record, and from that point forward, they're going to have a life of peril. And so that's the choice they made. But eventually, they're going to find out who the organizers of it, who provided them the money, the buses, and the shirts to come by and do this thing. These things are organized. They're not spontaneous events.
Yet again, we have been speaking with Mr. Brian Boyd, intelligence expert and commentator, right here on the Live Zone. We truly appreciate your time. We know this was last minute and took a lot for you to get on the line with us. We appreciate you, sir.
My pleasure. Thanks for inviting me.
All right, guys. We'll continue to monitor this throughout the afternoon right here on the Live Zone. Yet again, protesters have gained entry, if you will, to the Trump Tower in New York City. And as you see right there on your screen, are now being arrested and carted off to the local police station. We'll take a quick break and we'll be right back.